All right, so after securing the central and southern parts of Canaan, Joshua and the Israelites are staring down one last massive threat coming from the north. Let's dive into this. This is the final chapter of the conquest, a huge battle against a coalition bigger than anything they'd faced before, and they're armed with the most advanced military tech of the day.
And that really is the question, isn't it? How do you possibly defeat an army with what were essentially ancient superweapons? See, the northern Canaanite kings didn't just have more soldiers. They had chariots. And this was a weapon so powerful, so intimidating, it could literally break an army's will to fight. So what exactly were the Israelites up against here?
Okay, check this out, because this is fascinating. The Hebrew word for chariot is merkabah. Fast forward thousands of years, and what does the modern Israeli army call its main battle tank? They merkabah. That is absolutely not a coincidence. It tells you everything you need to know. These ancient chariots were the battle tanks of their day. They were designed for pure shock and awe, the backbone of any serious army.
So who exactly were these guys that Israel was about to face? Well, the kings in the north knew they couldn't take on Israel alone. So they formed the biggest, most diverse alliance we've seen yet, and it was all led by one very powerful king.
This is how the text describes the army that Jabin, the king of Hazor, pulled together. And Hazor wasn't just some small town. It was a massive, influential city, a real powerhouse in the north. So when the Bible says their army was like the sand on the seashore, that's not just pretty poetry. It's meant to convey a sense of a truly overwhelming, almost impossible to defeat force.
And this slide really shows you the scale we're talking about. This wasn't just a local dispute. Jabin's coalition brought in forces from all over the place, even people like the Jebusites, who were way down south, near what would become Jerusalem. Think about that. The threat of Israel was so real that it united the entire land, north and south. Old enemies were putting aside their differences to form one giant army. So you have this huge army, these super weapons coming right for you. And what does God tell Joshua? Something incredibly simple. Do not be afraid. What's really interesting is what happens next. We don't get a big, detailed breakdown of the battle like we did at Jericho. The text just summarizes it. The point isn't the fight itself, but the decisive victory that God promised. Israel did what they were told, and that massive coalition was completely wiped out. Now, after a victory that big, you'd probably expect the story to be about burning and destroying cities left and right. But if you look closely at the text, you find a really surprising and honestly a very strategic choice that Joshua and the Israelites made. 3. Just 3.
What in the world does this number mean? Well, it's a clue that totally changes how we should picture this entire conquest.
In the entire story of the conquest, the Bible only explicitly says that 3 cities were burned to the ground. Jericho, right at the beginning, that was the symbolic first victory. Which was a hard lesson in obedience, and now Hazor, the capital of the guy who led this whole northern coalition. So the big takeaway here is this was not a scorched earth campaign where they just leveled everything in their path.
Okay, so if they weren't burning most of the cities, what were they doing? Well, the answer is actually pretty brilliant, and it involves both their military strategy and just how ancient cities were built.
You see, the text says that Israel didn't burn any of the cities that stood on their tells. Now, a tell is basically a man-made hill. It gets created over centuries as a city gets destroyed and rebuilt over and over again on the same spot. So instead of destroying these super strategic, fortified locations, Israel took them intact. They were inheriting cities they didn't have to build, just like they'd been promised.
You know, when you read through these chapters, it's so easy to feel like this all happened in a flash, a few crazy weeks of intense fighting. But there's this one little verse that kind of pulls back the curtain and shows us what was really going on.
In Joshua chapter 11, it says that Joshua made war a long time with all these kings. Most scholars figure the main military part of the conquest actually took somewhere between 5 and 7 years. This was not a quick blitz. It was a long, grinding campaign to secure the land. And the whole book of Joshua, it probably covers a span of almost 30 years.
And this brings us to what is hands down one of the most difficult verses in the entire book from a theological standpoint. Why would God harden their hearts? Doesn't that sound like he's taking away their choice to even surrender?
To really get our heads around this, the best place to look is actually back in the book of Exodus with the story of Pharaoh. For the first few plagues, the text is very clear. It says Pharaoh hardened his own heart. It was his decision. It's only later in the story that the language switches, and it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart, almost like God was confirming a choice Pharaoh had already made over and over. It seems to be a similar idea here in Joshua. The Canaanites had already chosen to fight. And remember, we have examples like Rahab and the Gibeonites. They proved that the door wasn't completely shut. There was still a path to peace for those who chose it.
And so after this long war, after this final, massive campaign in the north, the narrative takes this huge, dramatic turn. It all pivots on this one powerful sentence: the wars are over. The entire mood of the book is about to shift from fighting to finally settling down. A whole new era is starting. So the wars are won. But before they can start carving up the land and handing it out, the story pauses. It's time for a final accounting, a complete summary of everything that was accomplished.
31. That's the final count. That's the total number of kings that Joshua and the Israelites defeated on the western side of the Jordan River. It's this definitive number that puts a final period on the end of the conquest.
Chapter 12 is basically the official after-action report. It starts by recapping the victories that Moses had on the eastern side of the Jordan, and then it gives this long, detailed list of the 31 kings that Joshua defeated on the western side. It's the complete record of 2 generations of struggle.
So why on earth would they include this long, kind of boring list of names? Because it is so much more than just a list. This is the crucial bridge that takes Israel from one phase of its story to the next. The fighting is done, the wins are officially on the books, and now the stage is set for the huge task of turning all this conquered land into a nation.
Seriously, think of it in today's terms. Chapter 12 is the spreadsheet. It's the raw data. It's the proof that gives a sense of finality and truthfulness to the entire military campaign. It's the factual foundation for everything that's about to happen with dividing up the land. It's basically the receipt for the promised land.
And that's really the question that's just hanging in the air as this era of war comes to a close. Winning the battles was one thing, but now, how do you actually live in it? How do you divide it fairly? How do you build a nation? That's a totally different kind of challenge, and it's exactly where this story is about to take us.